What's up guys, and welcome to my 4.4 updated Evernight guide. In this video, I'm taking you over everything you do need to know in order to understand Endbuilder, including a overview under kit and all memo spread details, best Lightcones for Evernight, best Relic sets and Planar Ornaments and for what situations, main stat and substat goals, and finally some general team building ideas. Stuck grinding in Honkai style? Need stellar jades fast? We've got you covered. Head over to U7 Buy, your ultimate gaming hub for save, fast, and cheap in-game top-ups. Whether it's Star Rail or your other favorite games, U7 delivers instantly and players love it. Check out their Trustpilot reviews, they're actually top ranked. On the Honkai Star Rail top-up page, you can recharge your account in seconds. When you head over to the page, all you need to do is pick the pack you do want, enter your UID and server, and buy now. If you want codes and coupons to apply, be sure to create an account for proper savings. USD is a recommended usage currency for best saving. Once everything is set, you can see the savings you're about to get. Want even extra savings? Be sure to use code PRESR at checkout for 5% off. Perfect for last minute pulls or surprising a friend. Click on the link in the description, recharge fast, save more, and keep blazing those trails. Evernight's basic attack is a generic doing ice damage based off her max HP to a designated enemy. Her skill consumes 10% of Evernight's current HP to summon her Memo Sprite. All ally Memo Sprites crit damage will be increased by 24% of Evernight's crit damage for 2 turns. That decreases for the duration by 1 at the start of Evernight's every turn. If Eevee is already on the field, 50% of Eevee's max HP will be recovered instead. We'll also gain 2 Memoria, however, if in Darkest Riddle state, we'll gain an additional 12 Memoria points, so a total of 14. Her ultimate will also summon her Memo Sprite if not already on the field. Eevee will do ice damage to all enemies equal to 200% of Eevee's max HP, and Evernight herself will enter the Darkest Riddle state, where all enemies will take 30% increased damage. Evernight and Eevee will do 60% increased damage, and will also be immune to crowd control debuffs. On cast, 2 charges for Darkest Riddle state will be gained. 1 charge will be consumed when Eevee uses Dream Dissolving as due, and at the start of Evernight's turn, if 0 charge remains, exits Darkest Riddle state. For talent, at the start of the battle, Eevee will be summoned with a base speed of 160 and a max HP equal to 50% of Evernight's max HP. Evernight or Eevee losing HP will make both of them gain 60% crit damage for 2 turns and 2 Memoria, and will be triggered once per received attack. At 16 or higher Memoria, all crowd control debuffs will be dispelled from Evernight, and Evernight will be immune to crowd control. Eevee being on the field will make Eevee immediately take action, and the immediate action can only trigger again only after Eevee uses Dream Dissolving as due. Her technique makes it to where at the start of the next battle, the crit damage buff for ally Memo Sprites will be obtained and is equivalent to the skill, and will also gain 1 Memoria. For the Memo Sprite details, Eevee's regular attack will automatically target the last enemy that Evernight did attack as priority, will do ice damage based off 50% of its max HP to 1 enemy, and for every 4 Memoria Evernight has, 10% of Eevee's max HP will be done as additional ice damage and will also gain 1 Memoria. Then for Dream Dissolving as due, it will be usable when Evernight has 16 or more Memoria and is currently not affected by crowd control. Every Memoria point will increase the damage to the primary target by 12% of Eevee's max HP and other enemies of 6% of Eevee's max HP. After use, all Memoria will be consumed, all of Eevee's HP will also be consumed, and Eevee will disappear. And then for the Memo Sprite talent, while Eevee is on the field, will be immune to crowd control debuffs and have an increased chance of being attacked, and also being on the field will increase the damage by both Eevee and Evernight by 50%. The unique enhance will be when summoned, this unit immediately takes action, so whenever Eevee goes on the field, it will immediately take action. And the other enhance will be to where when Eevee disappears, Evernight will gain 10% speed, and if Eevee did disappear after using Dream Dissolving as due, Evernight will gain 1% speed per Memoria point that was consumed, up to 40 Memoria, so up to 40% speed max, meaning up to a total of 50% speed you can get. The effect does not stack and will be removed at the start of Evernight's next turn. For bonus traces, her A2 will give Evernight and Eevee 35% crit rate. Either of them using an ability will consume 5% of own current HP, and will use it to increase crit damage by 15% for 2 turns, and Eevee using Dream Dissolving as due will recover a skill point for the team. Her A4 makes it to where at the start of the battle, 70 energy and 1 Memorial will be regenerated. Whenever Evernight or an ally Memo Sprite uses an ability, regenerates 5 energy and gains 1 Memoria. And her A6 will be able to increase ally Memo Sprite's crit damage when Evernight's skill is active, which further increases depending on the amount of remembrance characters. 1 makes it 5%, 2 is 15%, 3 is 50%, and 4 is 65%. Finally, for her Eidolons, her E1 makes it to where Evernight being on the field, depending on the amount of enemies, ally Memo Sprites will do damage increase from the original damage respectively, starting from 4 and going down to 1. So 4 enemies is 120% original damage, 3 is 125, 2 is 130, and 1 is 150. Her E2 gives both Evernight and Eevee a free 40% crit damage. And now any time that Evernight gains a Memoria, the points will be increased by 2, and Ultimate will increase the charge amount of Darkest Riddle State, so instead of 2, it is now 4. Her E4 increases ally Memo Sprite's weakness break efficiency by 25% when Evernight is on the field, and for EV specifically, will gain an additional 25%. And her E6 will increase the team's all-type res pen by 20% with Evernight being on the field, and EV using Dream Dissolving as a do will make Evernight gain 30% of the amount of Memoria consumed in this attack. So a 30% refund on the amount of Memoria consumed. For Lightcones, her best one overall still does remain her own signature, providing the wearer 30% max HP, 20% defense ignore for all Memo Sprites on the team, 30% damage percent for the wearer and their Memo Sprite, and also 8 energy when the wearer's Memo Sprite disappears. All this is super complementary to her actual playstyle, of course, as it is her signature. She's an HP scaler, so 30% max HP is really good. When the wearer's Memo Sprite uses an ability, which is quite literally right away and will always be happening, and that's 20% defense ignore for every Memo Sprite on the team, and her best teams are always full of Memo Sprites, so this is not only good for her own damage, but also really good for the entire team's damage if they have a Memo Sprite. More damage percent for Evernight and EV themselves, and also since you do constantly destroy your Memo Sprite or detonate it, every time you do get an additional 8 energy, which is really good for keeping uptime on her ultimate, and just to get the ultimate more quicker. So for overall best performance, this is one of her best for both damage and support. Great for her main DPS role if you're running that, and great for the general Mono Remembrance team as you do want to have this. However, if you do want best damage for Evernight, Castra's signature does outperform it a little bit, with 30% max HP and also 30% defense ignore for the wearer and their Memo Sprite, and a 12% action advance when the wearer's Memo Sprite disappears that triggers one time and will reset after ultimate. The reason this is better is it does provide more HP. The percentage is the same, but the base HP of this Lightcone is higher, so that is good there. The defense ignore is also just for self, but is 10% higher than Evernight's own cone. The difference is this action advance isn't too useful. When it does proc, it's nice, just because you can get the turn quicker, and especially paired with the speed effect of her actual base kit, this does complement that well. But I find the energy from her own Lightcone is definitely more helpful. So this is actually better if you want Evernight herself to do more damage. So for something like a main DPS Evernight, this is definitely viable. However, her actual signature usually boasts better results since you are increasing everyone's damage, and on Remembrance teams, often everyone is doing damage. So that is why her own signature has more value. But if you have, let's say, both of them, and you put Evernight's Lightcone on one of the other Remembrance teammates for whatever reason, in that case, you can definitely create some setups with that. Other than that, you could use either or of the Battle Pass Lightcones, so Sweat Now, Cry Less, or the Flower Remembrance. Sweat Now, Cry Less is better if you do need the crit rate, with 12% crit rate and 24% damage for the wearer and their Memo Sprite. At S5, a total of 20% crit rate and 36% damage percent. So free damage at all times and free crit rate for building her. Crit rate isn't generally a problem for Evernight because you only need 65 thanks to her base trace. So this can actually be easy to make it over cap, but if you have relics that fully focus on stuff like HP percent and also just crit damage, then this Lightcone can be utilized very well, especially if you have it at higher refinements. However, if you don't really need the crit rate, but you would like the crit damage, then Flower Remembrance can be better, with 24% crit damage and additional 24% crit damage for the Memo Sprite, as they would be doing 24% more crit damage. So not actually the stat, but rather dealing it. At S5, 40% for the wearer and also 48% for the Memo Sprite. This is better because technically you can do more damage and crit rate is less valuable, especially since this is also increasing own crit damage, which means the skill buff for Memo Sprite is getting further enhanced as she is able to give crit damage based off her own. And then EV just does more damage anytime you do crit. So this is definitely better overall. But if you really need the crit rate from the Sweat Now Cry Less, then that can outperform. Those are the real only options you do have. The last one is going to be the story's next page, just for the HP increase. At S5, it's a total of 32%. You're not actually healing with Evernight, so this is not going to be used. So it's just for the fact it provides you max HP and also pretty good base HP for a 4-star Lightcone. That is really the only option. It's going to, of course, be worse than every other option mentioned, but if you don't have any other options, this would be your go-to. Same thing kind of does apply to the Victory in a Blink. The actual part for the damage percent for all allies isn't something you can do just because she doesn't use an ability on an ally target. However, the actual regular effect is crit damage. At S5, 24%. It's also free, so you can further enhance the buff. Overall, you would just use the story's next page. That does outperform, but if you actually just happen to not have it. The Victory in a Blink Lightcone is free, so you could use that instead, although the base HP on that is low and doesn't provide any HP, so do keep that in mind. For her relic sets, her best in slot does still remain 4-piece World Remaking Deliver with a 2-piece increase to crit rate of 8%. 4-piece is able to increase the wearer and their Memo Sprite's max HP by 24%, and also increase the team's damage out by 15%, lasting until the wearer's next use of basic attack or skill. So the 2-piece makes her easier to build. The 4-piece is a very, very nice HP increase, which is going to be great for really all her roles. Further increases her damage, and then if you're using her with Castress, then more new build generation for casters in that sense, and then the uptime of it will practically just be permanent. Same thing with the damage percent, it is just a permanent 15% damage percent, and the damage percent also is able to stack. So if you have Cyrene on the team, which you probably always will, if she's also on World Remaking Deliver, that's fine because they do stack. So overall, this still does remain her best, and that still kind of also remains the only option. Other than that, you would just be 2-piece. So for crit rate, you got World Remaking Deliver and also Scholar 2-piece. For crit damage, you have a 4-piece Everglorious. I don't know why I said 4-piece. You just have Everglorious 2-piece, not the 4-piece, just the 2-piece, for 16% crit damage, or 2-piece Wave Strider. So depending on which one you need, you can run that, or you can do any of those and 2-piece Longevious for the 12% max HP. For Planar Ornaments, there are still 2 primary ones you want to do, with Bone overall being the best, providing 12% max HP and 28% crit damage for the wearer and their Memo Sprite. This one's just better for really all her roles since it's providing max HP and crit damage, which is both really good for her actual damage and main DPS capabilities in a sense, and also further enhancing the buff. And also, since it is increasing the max HP, it's better for the sub DPS and the Remembrance team for casters, just because there is more HP to drain. So you are getting the best value out of Bone Set for every single role she does have. However, if you are running her primarily as a main DPS and you just happen to have really good rolls on the Arcadia set, then you can run this, which is able to increase the wearer and the Memo Sprite's damage by 9%/12%, stacking up to 4/3 times, which would depend on the missing or additional teammates. In this case, it's Remembrance, so it's an additional with the Memo Sprites, so getting up to a 36% damage increase. This performs very similar to damage wise when it comes to Bone, but Bone usually does outperform ever so slightly. And since Bone is also better in the sub DPS role for more new build generation when it comes to caster specifically, that's why the value is just better. But if you do happen to have really good pieces and you're primarily doing a main DPS, then you can see just as good, if not ever so slightly worse results with Arcadia. And I'm talking about like a percent difference. It's not that bad. For the main sets on the relics, for the body, you are practically always going to do crit damage since getting the crit rate 65% is very easy through rolls, and you also want to further enhance the buff as much as you can. For the feet, just run HP percent. There was an argument for speed, but honestly, don't really bother anymore. HP percent always outperforms for the most part. For the orb, you can do either ice damage or HP percent. If you're running Bone, you primarily would want to do ice damage, unless with casters. If you're mainly running her as a sub DPS for casters, you should always do HP percent for the best new build generation. But for a more DPS sided thing, or if you want to focus less on casters and more on Evernight's damage, ice damage with Bone is going to be best. If you're running Arcadia, in that case, run HP percent, since Bone does provide some HP percent, so ice damage can be better in a sense, while Arcadia provides damage percent, so instead you would run the HP percent. And then for the link rope, you run HP percent. For the substats, you just focus on HP, crit rate, and crit damage. Crit rate being the first focus just to get it to 65%. Which becomes 100% thanks to her actual bonus trace. Once you're past that, then you just get as much HP as you can and as much crit damage as you can as well. A good HP to have is around 7,500. If you have Bone, especially if you have Arcadia and you're looking at a little less, depending on what orb you're running. If you're running HP orb, then you're still looking around that amount. If you get around 7,500, that's going to be good. If you can push that up even higher to the 8,000s, that's going to be really, really good. Crit damage as well, as high as possible. There's not really a limit because the more you have, the further the buff goes, and of course, more damage. But generally, getting it to around 180% is going to be very good. If you can get it higher to the 200% and above, that of course is going to be ideal. And if you can further than that, then your build is going to be very nice, especially if you have the other stats also achieved. Now for some general team building, we're going to start with Mono Remembrance as it's very easy to get out the way. The Mono Remembrance team is of course Evernight as the sub DPS / amp, with Castras being the primary DPS of the team. Third slot would always go to Hyacine, as you do need Hyacine for really both of them, especially Castras, because Castras without Hyacine is practically just unusable. Evernight DPS doesn't need a Hyacine as much, but still wants it. And then last slot would go to Cyrene as the Amper and also a damage dealer on this team. So this is probably the most synergistic team in the game, with everyone doing good stuff for each other. mostly focusing on Castrus's damage as she is the primary DPS of the team, and all providing nice support for each other, and also all being HP scalers for Castrus to drain the living hell out of. Then when it comes to substitutes, obviously if you're missing Castrus, then the team would become a main DPS Evernight, which we'll get into after this. But for Cyrene, you can instead actually use Mortonak's Blade, as he is actually a very good amper on this team as well, especially since he's also built with HP. The drain for Castrus remains good. If not him, you can also very much use Tribby instead. Tribby was the most used until Cyrene, where Cyrene booted Tribby off, but you can still very much use Tribby here. And you can also use RMC to mainly buff Castrus in this sense, so RMC could also work, but is going to be worse since RMC is focusing on just Castrus, so Hyacinth and Evernight are not really getting buffs out of it. Now, main DPS Evernight is also more flexible, since she can technically utilize a lot more, while also not needing the Hyacinth stapled on the kit as much. You still want to have Hyacinth on the team just because her max HP buff and such is super good, and then if you have a Lightcone, the drain for more Memoria. So while she still is best in slot, it's not nearly as needed. So a team would look like that. You would run Cyrene as well, so the team kind of remains Monitor Remembrance. This is really the main DPS Evernight team you would run, and then you can also sub out accordingly. Like instead of Cyrene, you can very much run Mortonak's Blade, like I mentioned. Instead of RMC, you can run Tribby. Or you can honestly even do this, because even if you don't have E2 Cyrene, since it is Remembrance, you can charge her all very quickly. So Mortonak's lowering the charge started off is not going to be a big problem. And then for sustain wise, you can just run whatever healer you need. Full would be the next best option, even though her attack buff is wasted. However, the energy is nice, but you can also just use something like Luosha or also Lingsha. For this amp slot, especially if you do have something like the Lightcone of Evernight providing the 20% defense ignore, you can honestly also use someone like Asheville in the slot because he has a massive 40% defense shred, and depending on more investment on the team, can go even higher. Although Blade is just going to be much better in this role, but Asheville is an open option. And that is the full 4.4 updated Evernight guide. I do hope you found this video helpful. If you did, dropping a like would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell for future videos like this, along with all the tips and content. And I'll see you later. Peace out.